I'd say because we have a lot of content to get through today and some excellent speakers lined up, I don't want to deprive anyone of that information and expertise. So my name is Julian Weiner. I'm the director of the Office of the Vice Provost, Innovations in Undergraduate Education. Our office has worked with a number of different folks around the university to coordinate this series. I'd like to thank you very much for attending today's session, as well as to our speakers for participating and providing your time and expertise to everyone in a time of some uncertainty and we'll say new opportunities to learn about different ways of providing experiences for students and working with our partners in communities and industry. This is the first of 8 sessions, and I do hope that you'll take time to look through and what other offerings that we do have through the other 7 sessions. There will be some that are more general interest. There are also some that are very specific to different types of experiential learning. So do take a look after this session, whether or not there are some additional issues that you'd be interested in exploring further. Today's session is really going to be around partnerships, and obviously this is key to the process of many different forms of experiential learning. And at a time when not only the institution but our partners are facing uncertainty about the short and long term and their current situation, a number of questions have arisen regarding how best to engage with partners, how best to determine their needs, and assess how they can not only fit into your curricular plans, but also how you can help with their identified needs. So I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm just going to hand this over to Colin McMahon, who's the Community Outreach Coordinator and the Office of Experiential Learning and Outreach Support in the Faculty of Arts and Science, and Dave Fenton, who is Entrepreneurship and Work Integrated Learning Program Coordinator at the Department of Management Co-op Program at the University of Toronto Scarborough, who have very generously donated their time to facilitate and help coordinate this session. And with that, I'll hand it over to them. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Julian. Can you hear me okay? All right. So my name is Colin McMahon, and I am the Community Outreach Coordinator in the Office of Experiential Learning and Outreach Support in the Faculty of Arts and Science. My role is to work with faculty members who are looking to embed experiential learning components into their courses and develop and facilitate reciprocal partnerships that address the needs of students and meet learning outcomes, while also being a benefit to our community, industry, government, and nonprofit partners. So I'm delighted to be one of the co-facilitators of this webinar, Effective Partnership Development and Engagement in a Remote Environment, and I'm really pleased to see such a strong turnout for the first session in this series of PD webinars, slated to run throughout July. A little over a month ago, our Office of Experiential Learning and Outreach Support organized a webinar on adapting EL to remote delivery. For those of you who attended, you'll recall that we offered some examples of how EL can be integrated in courses through remote delivery. We pointed to resources that have been developed to support EL at this time, and we provided a fairly high-level overview of the challenges of engaging partners right now. We thought it would now be useful to look on a more granular level at how partnerships can be developed in remote environments. Let me just advance the slide here. So our session goals today are basically to discuss, more specific strategies and approaches we're adopting in our outreach to partners, share examples of EL partnerships that are working through remote delivery, leverage some of the lessons that have been learned by those who have been engaging with partners, both new and old, consider how we at U of T can coordinate outreach and share partnership opportunities, and hopefully learn what is working for you as you engage with partners at this time. Now, our agenda today is pretty straightforward. It's as follows. After introductions are made, myself and my co-facilitator, Dave Fenton, will ask our 4 panelists a series of questions. We'll aim to leave hopefully 15 to 20 minutes at the end of our hour for questions and answers. And finally, we'll share some links to EL institutional resources including resources that have come out of the Office of the Vice Provost, Innovations in Undergraduate Education. These are designed to help you in delivering EL components in your courses and programs remotely. Just a few housekeeping notes I should share before we get going. We are recording our discussion today with the panelists, and momentarily we will launch a poll asking if you consent to us also recording the audience Q&A. Wow, that was quick. If one or more of you indicate that you do not consent, we will not record the Q&A period. All of you will receive an email after today's session that will include a link to the recording as well as the slide deck. As you know, registrants were invited to submit questions and comments in advance. I want to let you know that where possible, we will work these questions into our discussion with our panelists, and hopefully we'll also have an opportunity to address some of these during our Q&A session at the end. Finally, we encourage you to use the chat function to share your thoughts, post any useful links you might have, ask questions, which we'll do our best to address during the Q&A session. And now I'd like to pass it over to Dave Fenton, my colleague, who will make introductions and get our discussion started. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Colin. So as mentioned, I'm Dave Fenton, the Entrepreneurship and Work Integrated Learning Program Coordinator with the Department of Management at U of T Scarborough. I work out of our innovation center called The Bridge, where we do a lot of work integrated learning, experiential learning projects with a number of community and industry partners. Some of our session speakers joining us today, we have Kimberly Tull, who's the Director of Community and Learning Partnerships and Access Initiatives with the Office of Partnerships and Community Engagement at University of Toronto Scarborough. We have Professor Shauna Braille, Associate Professor, Teaching Stream and Director of Urban Studies Program and Associate Director, Outreach and Partnerships for School of Cities, Faculty of Arts and Science. We also have my co-collaborator at the Bridge, Professor Bill McConkey, who's an Assistant Professor in Teaching Stream with the Department of Management and the Academic Director of the Bridge at University of Toronto Scarborough. And lastly but not least, we have Myra Wesley, the Director of Learning and Safety Abroad at the Center for International Experience. So now I'm going to pass it off to Kim Tull, who's going to be talking about the focus of her portfolio and her work. Kimberly?
Can you hear me now? Great.
Yeah.
So thank you, Dave, and thank you everyone for inviting me to be part of today's conversation. I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be sharing on a really high level what we do over in the Community Development Engagement portfolio at the University of Toronto Scarborough, and look forward to the discussion later on. So creating remote partnerships at the University of Toronto during COVID and during the pandemic really and truly isn't much different than creating partnerships in person. They're rooted and grounded in the same principles. For us, it's about the Towards 2030 documents. One document we always go to roots us, which talks about the positive social force that the role the university can have going forward as the complexity and diversity of our cities and our ecosystems change. It's grounded in the President's 3 priorities, specifically priority 1 and 3, which is leveraging our urban location and reinventing and reimagining undergraduate studies. And then for us at the University of Toronto Scarborough, it's rooted in our Inspiring Inclusive Excellence Strategic Plan, which is grounded and articulates our commitment to accountability, transparency, equity, and excellence not being mutually exclusive, and shared leadership. So for us at U of T Scarborough in the Department of Community Development Engagement, our role is primarily to rethink the systems, the existing systems whose voices aren't there, where the barriers are, how can we infuse community into the university and the university into community in a way that honors and treats both parties with respect and dignity. How can we amplify community voice within the academy, looking at knowledges and whose knowledges have been created and validated and whose knowledges have been excluded historically from the institution. And so our role is to be a facilitator, is to work with community partners to balance out the power dynamics that often happens between community and university partnerships, We know that as a university, when we go to meet with someone, it could potentially be 10, 12 University of Toronto or University of Toronto Scarborough staff and one community partner. So ensuring that the voice is being heard, ensuring that the goals and the mandate of that community partner, and oftentimes those ideas come from community, and making sure that those are being honored and that we're treating it with value, and that at the end of it, we all are getting something that we need out of it and addressing the priority that the community partner has articulated. So we often talk about reciprocal learning partnerships, and what does that actually mean? For us, it's about the way it's asset-based community development. So it's the way that we do the work. It's not rooted in the deficit model of community. Historically, universities have looked at extracting data, extracting information from community, and not thinking that community brings something to the table. So we're not looking at community as a deficit. We recognize that those lived experiences are equally as valuable as the knowledge that we learn within the academy. And in fact, oftentimes, people from the academy are entrenched and embedded in community. And so those walls are very fluid. So for us, when we look at community development and engagement and partnership development, it's always linked to teaching and learning. It's linked to service, and that's on the curricular anchor side of things. And it's connected to research and scholarship. So the ways that we actively want to engage communities centered around those pieces. And then by having those back and forth generative conversations, it's an iterative process so that we can actually engage with community partners to identify a way forward. I should also mention that whatever we do also is in line and in tandem with local community wealth building strategies. Our work at the university shouldn't be done independently of the work that's happening in the community. So we try our best to align those priorities so that we can help advance and move forward local social change agendas. So during the pandemic, what have we been up to? That first group, City of Toronto and United Way, has been about a cluster table, and it's really an opportunity for us to participate at a table with all the community agencies in Scarborough, both on the north and south side of Scarborough, to talk about what's relevant and what's a pressing concern. That allows us to be able to listen and to bring those items back to the university and connect them to the appropriate people at the university, which we've done with the Bridge and other academic units at the university. We've seen a lot around research and innovation, whether that's around food handling or it's around transit and COVID. There's requests that are coming from that particular table that's directly linked to the research end of things. CARES is a partnership with the City of Toronto and Global Medic. It's a food distribution center that we decided to create at the end of April to address food insecurity in the Eastern GTA. Food insecurity has always been an issue within Scarborough, but even heightened so during the pandemic. And so we're able to repackage food to one pound packages and then distribute those packages to local food banks and the larger scale food banks and community agencies. Access to university during COVID is also something that's a priority for us. And that's just ensuring that we continue to make sure that we create intentional pathways and community of supports for students who have historically not been represented at U of T. So developing transitional year program for U of T Scarborough, which will be launching in September. And the far side is around anti-Black racism. And that is a quote from our president, Merrick Gertler, denouncing anti-Black racism. And so there's partnership opportunities that arise with Taibu Community Health Center and Sweetline Communications. So this is just a snapshot of all the different units at the University of Toronto Scarborough that have an external facing portfolio. So it's important that we all have conversations, that we know what each other is doing and what we're up to so that we don't overwhelm community partners during this time, since so much is already happening on their end. We want to know what's those relationships and the people who are doing the work and continue those conversations with them so that we can ensure that we address and we identify the priorities as needed. So what do we do in the department? In the snapshot, we help to navigate this decentralized, centralized system. It's difficult for those on the outside, and it's difficult for those who work at the university. We also can support with contracts and agreements as we partner with partnerships and legal counsel. We help to define the partnership and what that can look like, and then we ensure that it's grounded in UTSC's principles, values, and position. That's it. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you, Kim. And is there one way or some ways that you might feel that our outcomes can be impactful when delivered remotely?
I think as long as the outcomes need to be intentional, they need to be a joint, we use the language joint problem posing and problem solving. So they need to be developed in partnership with the community. That helps it to be relevant and it helps it to have actual impact and actually helps it to be sustainable and to have a legacy beyond the relationship that's taking place right now. So I think if people spend time having conversations, especially in this remote environment, I know we're all tired of Zoom meetings, but even pick up the phone and having that conversation is important into ensuring that the outcome actually is valuable and is relevant.
Fantastic. Thank you. Pass it on to Colin now.
Thanks so much, Kimberly and Dave. That was interesting. I'd like to now bring Sean Braille into the discussion. Sean, as mentioned, is Associate Professor Director in the Urban Studies Program and Associate Director, Outreach and Partnerships, School of Cities. Sean, I'm interested in hearing about your experiences in the Urban Studies Program at the School of Cities in terms of outreach. How have you gone about approaching your existing city partners over the past 3 months, and like what steps have you taken to assess their needs and priorities in the current circumstances?
Absolutely. So the first thing is I would like to echo Kim's remarks on partnerships, that there are similar principles that underlie community partnerships and partnerships between the university and external groups and organizations, regardless of whether we're working in a digital or a remote environment or not. And so those principles continue, and they continue to support the way in which we work with our partners, and they include things like trust and reciprocity, as well as respect. So that hasn't changed, right? And I think it's important at a time like this to remember what remains the same, because it makes the endeavor seem a little bit less overwhelming, I think, in the end run. So Urban Studies has a very long history of partnerships, and as a program, we have a large range of student placements. This includes our internship course, which is for senior sort of fourth year students, where they are placed predominantly in sort of professional office environments. We have a service learning component in our second year course, where we place students more with community groups and community organizations, often doing work that might be construed more sort of directly as community engaged learning or service learning. And we also have a course, a studio course, in which our students are placed in teams and they work with a sort of a client partner. So those are the range of the activities our students engage in. And in addition, at the School of Cities, as you noted, we also have, of course, the multidisciplinary urban capstone program, which is just 1 year old. I do not run this program. Urban Studies is involved in it, and it creates opportunities for multidisciplinary groups of students to work with it's essentially client facing, but there is a lot of work that takes place to curate and cultivate partner activities and to ensure that the student groups are working well together. Since we moved into a more sort of remote work environment, our students in our service learning placements had already completed their work. That would be the most challenging kind of environment to continue to work in, because many of them were working at places like food banks and shelters. And so we would have real challenges around vulnerability and placing students in even more vulnerable situations than before. And so we haven't actually had to deal with that yet, because that was already finished. But we did wrap up our internship program by having students work remotely, and it worked in all cases. And we are preparing now for the internship program to launch again in the fall. And there's been a lot of discussion about what we need to do for students, and clearly really a key piece of this, but we also need to think about, in this case, what do our partners need? And so one of the first things I did when we were talking about what courses could we run and provide an excellent learning experience and an excellent partnership experience, I surveyed our partners and asked them. I said, it looks like we're going to be remote. Some of our students may not be able to travel even if we come back to campus. Are you able to participate? And are there things that we could do to support this transition? And very rapidly, I received responses from more than half of the placement partners from this past year. And so based on that, we decided that we would be able to run the course again. And we're now in the process of working with partners to identify what students will be doing. We had tremendous interest in this course this year. It's a competitive entry course. Students have to apply. And there are 20 spots in the course. We had over 70 applications for the course, which I think demonstrates the real student interest. This course is, as I said, is really well suited to remote work, in large part because of the types of activities the students tend to be doing. They're already doing sort of working with research and writing, and sometimes doing some community engagement work that has now moved online. Working with media, some social media, some journalism, and working in environments in which the transition to online has mostly been completed already. So the other thing I would just close with is there isn't a magic formula here, and we've learned this. We learn this every day. I think flexibility is key, and having an attitude of understanding challenges and working with challenges to see what is the possible outcome we can provide for our students and for our partners. But again, with experiential learning, we also have to think about our faculty. So what additional supports or resources can we provide to faculty to smooth the transition, to ensure that we have, supported faculty and supported students and supported partners? And I think that's those three are all sort of really, really critically important.
That's very heartening to hear, especially given the results of your survey, that like your existing partners are actually being quite receptive to the idea of transferring or adapting to remote delivery. I'm wondering if you could speak to, if there are any partnership development tools or ideas or kind of creative approaches for engaging new potential partners in a remote environment that you share. Obviously, this is a far greater challenge, right, at this time.
Right. It's a great question, and one of the reasons why so many people have been successful in working from home, in making that sort of switch, is because we already have, for the most part, we have our teams are already built. We're already able to work with the partners we have, in the relationships we have. We've built that sort of that social capital up, and we're sort of drawing it down. And the point has been made that one of the reasons why we shouldn't expect to go remote on a permanent basis is because we need time to come back and build that up again. Having said that, we are going to be in an environment in which we will be faced with building new partnerships remotely. And again, I would go back to the principles of how do I normally build these partnerships? Well, some things we can't do, right? I'm not going out to community meetings and community events, but some things I can do. So one of the things I do regularly is I write to people who I've never met to say, what you do is interesting. Here's what I do. Here's this opportunity. Here's how I can, here's some examples of what our students have done in the past. Is this something that we could discuss? Is it something you're willing to talk about and to entertain? And so again, that's the same as we would do before, but a little bit more challenging, because I wonder if people have an appetite to test out new things now in terms of relationships and environments. And at the same time, as I'm saying that, I'm thinking, well, this is a time of experimentation everywhere. I study cities, and it's a time of massive experimentation and innovation in cities, and which means it can also be a time of innovation and experimentation in remote sort of learning and remote partnership opportunities. But my sort of usual approach is to rely on the tried and true, and on the less on the sort of new digital tools, and more on opportunities for very personal interaction and engagement. And I think, again, this is something that anybody who works on experiential learning will tell you. It requires a lot of interpersonal engagement and work and support. And it's a lot of work, and it's a very different kind of work than academics typically do in teaching a course. And I think we've seen some signs of that in placement courses or internship courses that have actually been canceled for next term. So I'm aware of a few departments in which there just simply wasn't an appetite to think through how this could work. I don't know that urban studies is so unique or special in this regard, but having, more than 30 years of experience as a program in running internship courses means that we have these really deep embedded relationships, and it's kind of baked into the program and into sort of how we envision our role in the university and in the community. But again, it's work. It requires a lot of interpersonal activity, and it requires leadership and support.
That's interesting stuff there, Shauna. Could I have one more question? Now, on the note of experimentation and sort of, making the most of the relationships that we do have already, the existing ones. And I'm just wondering if we can think, or if you can speak to how we might leverage partnerships to create experiential learning opportunities like that might work for multiple courses across disciplines.
Mm-hmm. You and I discussed this earlier. In urban studies, what we've seen happen is that, let's say we'll have one student placed at an organization, whether it's a city councilor's office or a research organization, where the student will make a very good impression and do some fabulous work, and then will help us to build the sort of the relationship with the leads, with the staff at that organization, which then gives us a chance for the next course to go and say, by the way, we have a new course running and we require projects where you might need a team of 4 students. And so that is how we work to extend those. I know that the School of Cities Multidisciplinary Urban Capstone program works with a number of partners that we've worked with in the Urban Studies program. Again, part of it is there are these sort of longer term connections from alumni that we continue to build, and I would say alumni is another really important source of opportunities for engaging between the university and the community and the city, especially alumni who have gone through your program, who have participated in these, and then we have people who sit on boards of the organizations in which they were placed, who have started their own nonprofits, who work across the city, who are very willing to welcome students. And that is a way to actually build on placements we already have with new partners who we have some sort of affiliation with and to.
Okay, thanks so much, Shauna. That's a lot of food for thought there. I'll turn it now over to Dave, who will speak to Bill McConkie.
Thanks, Colin. And so, Bill, why don't you take us away after I skip your headshot here?
Nice. Thanks, Dave. How's my sound?
Sounds great.
Great. Well, thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us. Dave and I work very closely in the Bridge. And as I think he mentioned, we are a wonderful collaboration between our management program at UTSC and the UTSC library. We refer to ourselves as a business and research innovation center and a collaboration center. And we have a number of things that we do there, including develop startups in a pretty rigorous training kind of environment for entrepreneurship. Some of the same methodologies we use and apply to the work integrated learning domain. And then we also do advanced training and research in support of the management program, as I said, in collaboration with the library team. I'm going to just nerd out for a second. 2 models that we built. We had been dabbling, we have a co-op program that's 40 years old and world-class, but in terms of other class-involved work-integrated learning, we were trying out a few models over the last few years of having, for instance, marketing students do marketing plans for the startups, and strategic analysis class doing similar kind of programs for other groups. But when we launched the bridge and we attempted to figure out how can we build more efficiency and effectiveness into our approach, we really had to kind of consolidate what we thought we knew so far and build what we referred to are these two models. One is the program model of how we generally develop capacity for WIL projects, and then the other one is the project model that I'll explain next. So the first one, the program model, we affectionately refer to as the acceleration web, and it's basically this. Dave and I are getting to know our own university, particularly UTSC, but across the university, we're trying to learn who all our neighbors are. Even within management, I'm a management prof, and there's so many I don't know faculty and staff, and I don't know what they're up to, let alone the other areas of the campus. And so we've been reaching out. We've been doing presentations, getting to know people, letting them know what our mission is, and categorizing, like learning and documenting who's interested and what kind of things do they want to offer up to the world of work integrated learning initiatives. So we recognize, of course, that the biggest and best projects are managed not by one functional area, but by the intersection between several. And as we manage projects, we try to do so with an eye on building assets that are reusable, whether it be technological assets or program management assets, obviously intellectual assets, building the skills and the capabilities of our people, documents and other research assets. And we hope that every project lends itself to the sustainable, opportunities of the next projects. And then that leads us to our project model called, guess what, the project funnel. And the notion of a funnel is a whole bunch of of kind of small units go in the top, and then down at the bottom is a much more narrow set of more developed, let's say, assets or capacities. This is a nice example of how we take a project, which we have a group that discerns if a WIL project, is both something that fits our general focus. We have a few areas that we try to focus on, and if we have the capacity to truly help and do a good job with this project. Once we have that initial curation underway and a project is green lit, I guess, our focus is to try to get it into the curriculum and into the into the co-curricular life of the students in a way that is kind of follows this funnel model. So we want to get early stage students helping us, for instance, define the problem. Do some preliminary secondary research, sometimes even primary research, such as with Loblaws, we did a secret shopper initiative as they were testing out a few new promotional initiatives of themselves. But in the early stages, we're looking for lots of people, lots of students, not necessarily the most trained students. And then with these projects, in the life of the project, we then try to take the outputs from those early stages, pop them into mid to later stage students' classes and co-curricular lives, and get them to work on somewhat more sophisticated problem dimensions. Ultimately, and we'll talk about a couple of examples, we then will get our experts on faculty to weigh in with their domain experience, their domain knowledge, with the hope that whenever relevant, we even hire co-op students in the bridge under the mentorship of these U of T experts, and they'll actually produce final products, whether it be a research document, a piece of software, some kind of program map, etc. I think we have a slide with a few examples. Just before that, in terms of the project requirements and scoping. So again, it's important that we, and we're getting, we're trying to get better at this. It's a work in progress, but we can't do everything, and we shouldn't do everything. We want to help those both in the local patch, in the local public sector patch of community organizations, as well as our corporate partners. We want to help them in ways that we think we can actually provide real insights, provide a really rich experience for the students, and continue to develop the partnership over time. That requires an awful lot of support, and I'm going to jump to one of the commentaries, but it's really rewarding. But boy, it's really necessary to try to stay disciplined and be very careful about projects we choose, and then how we curate our piece of the project, because these students, for the most part, are really motivated, but they're students. I mean, they're not getting paid, and they're not 20-year veterans in this industry, and so the management dimensions are very, very important to try to get right. We and just before, again, sorry, just before this last slide, one of the ways that my life has changed is that as a management prof, and I'm in strategy and entrepreneurship. I do write case studies from time to time. I do field research with entrepreneurs, but we're doing a whole bunch of those now. So we are really replacing the off-the-shelf Harvard business case in our program with case studies that myself, Dave, and other faculty are writing smaller, real-time case studies that characterize a real-time problem that we're going to solve in the classroom. Yeah, brief look at some of our current partners, and some of them represent some really amazing initiatives right now where we are going multi-class, such as with TELUS Financial Solutions, Toyota and Nestle, where we've written an initial case, made some solutions, updated the case, popped it into a more senior class, et cetera, et cetera. And then in the middle, the African Impact Initiative is a nice example of how we've taken, I mentioned the entrepreneurial training and formation we do. I mean, the management department has a entrepreneurship stream, but we took a lot of that and have applied that co-curricularly in this program we call the New Venture Program. And that's both for startups, but also for kind of innovation projects in the corporate world. We've just applied it, though, to a student of mine from about 4 years ago. He got the Department of Management's help in creating something called the African Impact Initiative to support African students here and all African initiatives back in Africa. And the most recent initiative that they invented was the African Impact Challenge, where we had a contest for teams in Ghana to apply to the New Venture Program in Ghana. And 3 teams were victorious, and 2 weeks ago began this summer program in starting their business with our help.
And Bill, just thinking of all this activity, how have you had to adapt your practices and the approach of applying the funnel and the web to the new remote landscape?
Yeah, so great question. So I think the management challenge is just a little heightened. I'm the kind of guy that likes to get the team together in front of a whiteboard for hours and looking at all the interfaces and all the little interrelationships within a project, and that's just tough, no matter what tools you try. So we're just challenging ourselves to just break it down, just be very careful to think through the different dimensions of a project. And then one of the things I'm learning to do is having smaller curated kind of meetings online. I can't have 20 people on the whole team and be effective at the project. I just simply need to have more meetings with smaller groups and take little pieces of the project at a time and make sure we're all on the same boat, on the same page, and getting things accomplished. that's certainly one thing I've noticed.
Yeah, that makes good sense. In the name of time, thank you for all your insights. I think we should pass it off to Colin and Mavish.
Thanks, Dave. And right now, I think we're going to turn our attention. We've been talking about community and city partners, and we're gonna talk to Mavish Wesley right now, the Director of Learning and Safety Abroad, Center for International Experience. Ask her a few questions about how we might adapt to remote experiential learning in international global contexts. So first question I have, Mavish, is what types of global partnerships and engagements have you seen working remotely since the pandemic was declared? And what types do you envision working while travel restrictions remain in place and students, are prohibited from activities abroad?
First of all, hello. Glad to be here. And great question, Colin. I would say I've been listening to the other speakers talk, and the one thing I wanted to highlight is that in the international space, a lot of our partnership development work actually has been remote traditionally, because we have partners around the world, about over 160 partners in over 40 countries, and we were not able to go to all those 40 countries all the time. So there has been a big element of partnership development from that perspective in a remote space. What has changed, as you noted, is students are unable to travel at the moment. And we at the Learning and Safety Abroad team are big proponents of global learning in spite of challenges, sometimes big ones, sometimes small ones, like no planes are flying. So what I would say to that is we've been looking at adapting our global learning offerings to our students, especially in reciprocity spaces around virtual exchanges as one way of embedding global learning for our students. So just like U of T has been looking at models of offering online courses to our students, whether or not they're able to get here or have to do them remotely, we're looking at options offered by our partner institutions to be able to be taken by students in an online space. Now, one of the questions I get in that regard is what's really the advantage of students taking a course online at another institution versus ours? And what I would say to that is cultural context that is applied to the content, which may be relevant and which may be taught in different spaces. So looking at context, both local, global, and cultural, as well as having voices included in that. So that's one way we're shifting our thinking of offering global learning to our students. Another initiative that we're working on is called Global Classrooms. And Global Classrooms is really a way to take what we have in virtual spaces offered to our students from U of T. So whether it be a course, whether it be a field experience, whether it be an internship or a placement, and embedding that global component within existing resources, practices, and offerings to our students. The idea isn't to create a new course code or a set of transfer credits, etc. Really the idea is around having anything ranging from, say, asynchronous guest lectures, tapping into international peers or partnerships that faculty members may already have or are looking to develop, to joint student team projects, working with a real life client, something that some moderators spoke about, or sorry, some panelists spoke about, how to engage students in teams or individually with clients, projects, researchers around the world. So that's some of the ways that we're looking at. So Global Classrooms is something that we're focusing on. And I just wanted to flag that for people that are already doing some really great work. Faculty members that have been engaging with international peers, not necessarily at the institutional partnership level, but the idea is to build upon something that's existing, not just create new things.
And could you talk about some of the other programming that the Center for International Experience has been developing, and how you are addressing and overcoming, hopefully, issues that arise when implementing international EL remotely, right? I'm thinking about, coordinating across time zones, making sure there's equitable access to software, hardware, providing opportunities for immersive learning experience, that sort of thing.
No, that's a great question too. I won't lie, a big part of learning abroad and researching and working abroad comes from being abroad. And there is that essence of immersive experience that we do lose without having students being on the ground in those locations. But barring that, and given how resourceful our students and our faculty have been so far, how do we bring those experiences? And you mentioned some of the challenges around time zones. I would say technology has been another feature depending on in the place of the world that you're in. Access to technology, software, hardware can be very difficult. You may be in a country where firewalls are very strict and don't let through any programs, Microsoft Teams, for example, which is something that we use, or BB Collaborate. But let me start with some of the other examples. One of my favorite examples right now is how we were able to convert some research abroad placements over the summer that we were offering into remote placements. We have close to 20 students engaging in research projects with universities around the world and across 4 continents, which I think is brilliant because in spite of not being able to be in the country and having those conversations one-on-one with those PIs, what our students have been able to do is not just talk virtually with the researchers across the world, access research materials and data, but also be plugged into the systems and labs virtually into other spaces. And as time zones go, I remember being a student, and I was definitely more flexible with my time. So combination of asynchronous activity along with flexibility in being able to let our students set their own pace and set their own meeting times is a critical component to that, because time zones will exist. And as I said, in our partnership world in global learning, what we do is when we have to meet with Singapore, it is a 9 p.m. meeting here, right? So sometimes that's one piece that is often required, but it bears repeating, I would say. I did want to add another component around technology. Having worked with some students in the space, especially in the research space, for remote learning, what I've noticed is students are definitely more savvy than I am, for example, with technology use. And when there are restrictions or limitations on what can be accessed, I've definitely noticed them find very innovative ways to connect. So if Teams isn't available, they will create a WeChat group or a WhatsApp group to be able to continue those conversations and have those meetings. And I think Shauna said that in her time, that what we're learning, we're continuing to learn, is how to be adaptable and flexible in our approach to work and building these EL opportunities.
Absolutely. One last quick question. I have to keep this fairly brief because we do want to have a few questions after this. If you could just very briefly give a sense to instructors what they can do now. Those who might be interested in continuing or creating an international experiential learning opportunity, and they're wondering what can be done to engage remotely with international partners or develop partnerships going forward.
Absolutely, and I will keep this brief because I want to engage with the audience as well. So at CIE, we're currently working on building a Global Classrooms Toolkit, something that I mentioned a bit earlier, and it was we're building this in partnership with CTSI and other existing resources that faculty members and instructors can access. And the idea is to address and talk about some of these issues that we've just scratched the surface on right now. So technology, time zones, setting up meetings, engaging students, etc. As I said, we have a lot of partnerships around the world, but also the goal is not to make it onerous on any faculty members to create or develop new partnerships. So whether it's to ideate or whether it's to build upon existing partnerships or create new partnerships, CIE is here to support you. So if you're interested in that, the best way to engage in a conversation is to please contact me, and I will leverage my amazing team to help you with developing anything that you're thinking of. Yeah, and I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much, Mavish. That's fantastic. I'll turn it over now to Dave to get our question and answer period going. I know we have only 10 minutes left, but Dave, do you want to get us started?
Sure, thanks, Colin. Did we have anything that came up from the group in the audience that they wanted to hear immediately? I know we had some hands that went up. Yeah, I'm not seeing anything come up here. So just moving on to Kimberly. If you're thinking of kind of some of the universal themes that were coming through from some of our partners out in the community, is there a particular nature of project or type of support that they've been looking for amid these new times that we're all experiencing?
Thanks, Dave. I think at the beginning, for all of us, we're hearing the theme of flexibility and being very reactive. That was a common theme at the beginning. The priority and what they were thinking about was really the human aspect of COVID. So dealing with the reality of people not having clean water, hygiene stations and washrooms, food. And so some of those pieces were coming up, but how do you then provide support if all of your doors have been closed? So business continuity became an ongoing conversation regardless of where we went. We were able to connect a few organizations to the bridge and management to support businesses, whether they're restaurants, whether they're the mental health associations, to move to a digital platform to be able to offer those supports to the communities that they serve, and through online means. And I think that was a big piece for them. A lot of them have been on the ground and dealing with people face to face. And so it was a daunting task about how do we move an entire business. We were overwhelmed at the University of Toronto of how to move out the entire operation to digital, to remote systems. So that was one piece. The other piece has really been around the research. And so what are some of the key learnings about the way the community's been mobilizing around COVID? The role of transit and race with respect to COVID, and then just opportunities to be able to determine how they can continue doing this work if this is going to be the new normal. So whether that means we're connecting our critical development studies students to the CARES and global medics so that they can be able to get what they would normally get an international experience, they can actually work with an emergency response organization here. And then what does that mean moving forward for us on the road? Or if it means when we're looking at food security, is there ways for us to be able to think about this from a systemic perspective and look beyond the borders of Scarborough and into Durham? And then if we can actually start looking at advocacy, lots of conversation around advocacy for priorities and needs of the people in Scarborough.
Great, thank you very much, Kimberly. We just had a question that came through right now from